The world is changing faster than you can imagine. The old systems are collapsing. Join us as we delve into the minds driving the future, the Clean Titans.
Welcome, Clean Titans, and thank you for joining us for a conversation that gets to the heart of climate action in a way you might not expect. Today, we're speaking with a remarkable entrepreneur, Alex Wright-Gladstein. She's not only the co-founder of Ayar Labs, a company using light to make data centers more energy efficient, but also the CEO and founder of Sphere, a movement to get 401k money out of fossil fuels. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a privilege to have you. Your journey is truly unique. You've gone from winning the MIT Clean Energy Prize to founding a deep tech company and then pivoting to climate finance. What was the eureka moment that made you realize your biggest impact could be in the financial sector rather than just in technology?
I think I started having that realization when I realized we're running out of time on climate change. I was living in San Francisco. I had been running Ayar Labs, my first company, for a few years. And we had one of those days where there had been these wildfires and the smoke got so bad that the sky was orange all day. And it was the 5th summer in a row that we had a wildfire season. And I just knew that wasn't normal. And I had been terrified about climate change ever since I was a kid, and my 7th grade science teacher opened my eyes to it. And so it's been my driving reason for everything I've done for a very long time. But that moment made me realize, wow, my career plan, which had been a plan to spin technologies out of labs over and over again, I thought that was the way I could have the biggest possible impact on climate. I realized maybe it's just not going to happen fast enough. It takes 10 years to get a technology from a breakthrough in a lab to having a scale, like the scale of impact on the planet that you need to have to start to reverse some of the trends of climate change. And I felt that firsthand running Ayar Labs. It just takes time. And it felt like we were running out of time. And that's when I started thinking about, how can I think outside the box and just accelerate the change? Because the other thing that I realized around that time was that public opinion on climate change had really transformed over the past few years. It was around 2020, I believe, when we had that Orange Sky Day. And I just started engaging with people on the topic of climate change more. And I realized that every time I brought it up with someone, they were leaning in and saying, yes, I'm worried too. What can we do to help? And it all of a sudden seemed universal, which is a big change from when I was younger. And bringing up climate change, I felt like a crazy person in a corner being like, guys, shouldn't we be worried about this thing? And people were like, yeah, whatever. And now all of a sudden, everyone seemed to be concerned. And I was like, okay, public opinion is here. It's where it needs to be. And what I've been hoping for my whole life has been for everyone to care about this thing. And now all of a sudden they do. So why haven't we fixed it? Like what do we need to do now to actually get there? And in thinking through that, I wouldn't say it was one eureka moment. It was actually a slow realization and mindset shift that it's not just about bringing the technologies into people's hands that we need, but it's also about changing the systems we live in and in really grappling with the idea of how do we speed up systems change so that, this world, especially in the US we live in, where most people have to drive a car to get to work and where most people's homes are heated by gas or they cook with gas stoves. There are just these real systems we live in where it's hard to change those things. How do we speed that up? One answer is obviously policy, government, right? That's how we organize ourselves as human beings. But what influences policy the most? Money. At least in our country, that's definitely the case. And realizing that brought me back to a problem I had been grappling with running Ayar Labs, which was our 401k plan. I had been trying to get climate-friendly investment options in our 401k for years. It had taken over 3 years to get a single option that wasn't invested in fossil fuel companies on the 401k plan of a climate tech company. And I just couldn't believe how long it took and how hard it was. And so when I realized, wait, money is something that can speed up systems change. And wait, there's probably a lot of money in 401ks. That's when I started really taking that 401k problem seriously and trying to learn as much as I could about the 401k industry. And I guess you could call that the eureka moment.
Yeah, I've been looking for that too in my investments, and it's so hard to find anything that, you can find some ETFs that are dedicated, but nothing broad-based. So it's really difficult. And a lot of people would love to do it. Like I wanted to do it, but I couldn't. So thank you.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people try to invest in a way that's good for people and planet and are told, no, you can't. I wasn't alone as CEO at Ayar Labs asking 401k providers to do that for us. There are people everywhere being told all the time by 401k providers, also by personal wealth advisors. That part is wild to me. How many people I get coming to me every day saying, I asked my wealth advisor if I can invest in a climate-friendly way, and they said no. I'm like, this is your money. They should not be telling you can't do what you want. Or they'll say, they said I have to trade off returns if we're going to do that, so they can't advise towards that.
And then,
the ignorance, that's not true at all. It drives me crazy.
And then, a lot of fossil fuels are going to be stranded assets as we transition. And a lot of these legacy companies are going to be toast. So it's better to not invest too much in them. People don't realize that.
It's a macro trend that is an industry in decline. And so it's clear that not only are we all likely to lose that money in the future, but actually, for the past 2 decades, the fossil fuel industry has had the worst returns of any sector of the economy. For 2 decades
and that's just the beginning. And that's just the beginning.
It doesn't take into account the stranded asset risk, which you're absolutely right. Like that will all go close to zero at some point, and it'll probably fall off a cliff at some point and lose a lot of people a lot of money.
As well as there's going to be liability, because a lot of damage from climate is going to be just like the tobacco industry is going to come back to bite them.
Very true. It's very true.
Your passion for environmental began at age 12, and you've been working on the connection between technology and climate action for a long time. You co-founded Ayar Labs after winning the MIT Clean Energy Prize. Can you tell us about the experience and the technology behind Ayar Labs that helped reduce the energy consumption of data centers, just briefly?
Yeah. So I met my co-founders for Ayar Labs at MIT. I had gone there for an MBA, really as an excuse to be able to spend 2 years getting to meet people across campus who were inventing things that could have an impact on climate, which was amazing because there are over 300 labs at MIT that do energy-related research. And I got to meet a lot of those people in those labs. And this one group especially stood out because they had just invented the first processor chip to communicate using light. And I didn't know anything about the semiconductor industry or photonics at the time, but I could tell that this was a true breakthrough. And I had a feeling it could really transform the computing industry as a whole. And so I convinced them to start a company. It's called Ayar Labs. And what we do is we sell something called optical I/O chiplets. We sell them to companies that make the processor or GPU chips. So like the Intels, NVIDIAs, AMDs of the world. We enable them to send data from their central chips optically, so across fiber optics. And that makes it possible to send and receive much more data from those central chips than you can using wires the traditional way. And that's important because there's been just a huge bottleneck in the world of compute, especially with AI now, where those processing chips are idling most of the time, just waiting for data because there's such a bottleneck in those copper interconnects bringing data in and out. And so by bringing fiber optics directly to the chip, you open up that bottleneck and make it possible to make full use of the computing power that you have. And it enables entirely new architectures within the data center for this new era of big data and AI. And those new architectures that make full use of the computing power you have can cut down on the energy use of compute. It can cut it in half. And that comes from both the interconnects themselves using much less power, but also from increasing the utilization of the processing power you have. So you don't have GPUs and CPUs sitting there idling, waiting for data and using almost as much power while they're idling as they do when they're working. So that's really the breakthrough.
You guys must be doing crazy amounts of business, because $7 trillion, that's more than the GDP of all the countries in the world except for US and China, is being invested in data centers for AI in the last year, which is crazy. So
we're doing well.
You can decrease their energy consumption of the AI data centers, which is exploding, right?
That's the idea. We want to cut it in half and speed up compute while we're at it. So it's really a win-win.
Right. The core mission of Sphere is to get 401k money out of fossil fuels. The scale of this is mind-boggling. Over $1.5 trillion are invested in fossil fuels companies through U.S. retirement savings alone. For the average person, this is a hidden emitter. How do you help individuals and employers understand this problem and see the potential for change?
That's such a good question. And it's so important to raise that awareness, because most people, when they think about the personal impact they can have on climate change, they think about, oh, I have to figure out how to pay for installing solar on my roof, or if I'm a renter, that's not even an option. Or, oh, I need to drive an electric car, but those are expensive. It's hard to change your lifestyle. Oh, do I need to go vegan? Do I need to never fly again? Is it not okay to visit my family for Thanksgiving? These are real trade-offs that are not easy to make, but it turns out that there's one thing they can do that has a bigger impact typically than any of those things. And it's a much lighter lift. It's moving their money out of fossil fuels. And that can have a bigger impact because you become no longer an investor in those fossil fuel companies that are responsible for a vast majority of the emissions. I think it's 70% or so of the emissions globally come from fossil fuels. And so by not being an owner in that responsibility, you can have a huge impact and make a real statement that the status quo is not okay. And so how do we communicate that? How do we make people aware? One thing that we do a lot of at Sphere is we really help to grow the social movement that's existed since long before we came along. It's really kind of originated with pension fund participants and also 401k plan participants at some of the biggest companies and some of the biggest unions. With the 401k plans, it's been at companies like Google and Microsoft and Apple, where they have $50 billion in assets in a single 401k plan at those companies. And employees there have been asking for climate-friendly investment options for years, some of them going back 10 years. Like at Microsoft, they started asking for this in 2016, and they've gotten thousands of signatures on petitions. They've sent hundreds of emails to HR. So this social movement has really existed for a long time. And we work to raise awareness of the fact that this is one of the most impactful things you can do to help grow that social movement. And then we help educate people once they do care and they want to move their money. The first thing anyone can do is just move money that's under their own control. So if you have money in an individual retirement account, an IRA, or in a brokerage account, no one else can stop you from investing it how you want. So anyone can move that money. But then the next step is, if you work at a place that offers a 401k or a pension, it's organizing with your colleagues to get better options in that 401k or pension. And so we do a lot of educating to help those employees who are organizing understand how to talk to HR and how to educate HR and their 401k advisors who work with their HR people that they can do this from a fiduciary perspective. Because when it comes to 401ks and pensions, the people who manage those have a fiduciary responsibility to make decisions just based on financial metrics. They can't decide to add a climate-friendly option to a 401k plan because a company has some core values that they care about climate change. That's actually illegal, according to some interpretations of ERISA law, what regulates those 401ks. So they have to make decisions based on the risk return profile of a fund and based on the fees associated with a fund. The good news is that investing in a climate-friendly way can compare very favorably with non-climate friendly funds when it comes to that risk return profile and the fee structure. What we found before starting Sphere was there were climate-friendly funds that had very good performance, so good risk return profile, but they tended to be actively managed. So they weren't checking the box when it came to low fees, which really matters in 401ks because there are a lot of lawsuits, especially these excessive fee lawsuits. So that's actually why I started Sphere, was to make the first climate-friendly fund that is designed to check the boxes of those 401k plans, including with low fees, so that employers don't have to worry about excessive fee lawsuits. So going back to your question, first, we raise awareness of the fact that this is something that can have a huge impact, and we really uplift that social movement and work to spread the word through partnerships with organizations like Stand.Earth, who are working with actors to get climate-friendly options in the SAG-AFTRA pension plan, and just getting a lot of press and a lot of social media coverage of this topic. And then we lead people to our website where we have resources for how they can talk to HR about adding climate-friendly options to their plans. And then we have, at the end of that kind of funnel, I guess you can think about it as, is the product. So we have climate-friendly funds that are designed to check the boxes of what those HR people and 401k fiduciaries need to see so they can make the swap and add it to their 401k plans.
You recently mentioned on FinTech TV that investing in an environmentally friendly way actually helps investors come out ahead. Can you elaborate on that? Why is divesting from fossil fuels not just a moral choice, but a sound financial strategy for retirement?
It comes down to that data that we were mentioning earlier, which is the returns data on the fossil fuel sector. And I first came across this in 2020. There was an article that S&P Global had written. That's the company that makes the S&P 500 index, and they make a lot of different indices as well. And some of the indices they make are sector indices. So it shows the returns of each different sector of the economy. And in 2020, they published this article showing the returns of all the different sectors of the economy. It was not about climate change or fossil fuels. It was just a broad overview of here's how the different sector indices performed in the decade from 2010 to 2020. And they label one sector energy. And in finance speak, both for S&P Global as well as for other big companies like Bloomberg, they call fossil fuels energy. Energy doesn't include solar and wind because they put solar and wind companies and similar types of companies in the tech sector index. And so if you look at the energy sector index and look at all the companies in there, they are all fossil fuel companies. And so it gives you a really easy way to see how the fossil fuel industry has been performing. You just look at the energy sector index. And in that 10-year period from 2010 to 2020, that energy sector, the fossil fuels, had the worst performance of any sector over that 10-year period. And they had another graph showing the volatility of each sector over that 10-year period. And the energy sector had the highest volatility of all the different sectors. And looking at that made me think, wow, typically people are okay accepting higher volatility in an investment in exchange for better returns. And it's fascinating that the energy sector offers neither. It's both the most volatile and has the lowest returns. Why would anyone invest in that? And then I thought, well, maybe it's an outlier. Maybe it's just this specific 10-year period where it just did not do well. And so we ended up pulling data going back to even before the 2008 financial crisis and coming forward all the way to this year, 2025. So we've looked at a full 20-year period, and whether you're looking at any 10-year period within there, or looking at 15-year periods, or 20-year periods, or even 5-year periods, any longer-term time frame within the past 2 decades, the energy sector has had the lowest returns and the highest volatility. And that trend has held true. And so given that data, it's actually very simple to create an index fund that just doesn't invest in the energy sector. And then you can expect to have slightly higher performance than any index that does invest in the energy sector over a longer term time period. Now, there will be short periods of time where that's not the case. For example, we created the Sphere 500 fossil-free index and then the Sphere 500 climate fund that tracks that index in 2021, in late 2021. And in 2022, Putin invaded Ukraine. And that made oil and gas prices skyrocket. So actually, in our first year of operations, our index underperformed the S&P 500 index. It was a tough year to go live. But in the subsequent year, that energy sector lost all the gains it had made the prior year. And now over the longer term time frame, we've now been live for 4 years, you actually are doing very well by not investing in energy again. So essentially, if you are an investor who is investing over a long-term time frame, if you're not a day trader, it just makes financial sense to not invest in the energy sector. And because we serve people saving for retirement, we know they have that longer-term time preference. We know they're not day traders investing in a 401k plan. And so it gives us very good clarity of what our goal is when we're investing for our customers. And we make sure to equip 401k advisors who are the biggest influencers in that decision of what fund options should we give employees at each company. There's a 401k advisor they hire to help advise them on what fund options to provide. And we meet a lot with those 401k advisors and equip them with this data so that they can make that case and document it well that they're offering a fossil-free option in that 401k plan for financial reasons, and that financial data is there.
And the clean energy just keeps getting better and cheaper. So, and faster, better, cheaper, faster, more convenient. And there's no end to it.
And it's popular, right? Like people like driving electric cars. It's a really nice feeling when you do go off the grid, when you can fully power your home through solar and especially have batteries. Like people like that. And the technology is getting there where it's getting easier and easier for people to start doing that. And so that's what's really driving that long-term decline in the fossil fuel sector. It's because people do like those alternatives. We don't advise for anyone to invest when they're saving for retirement to invest 100% in one sector. Like we're not going to say, go invest only in solar, because every industry has its own patterns. And so it can outperform or underperform, and it's risky to invest only in one thing. So we always recommend diversified investments. But it's true that the climate tech sector is an exciting one.
You've identified two types of customers, heart followers and rule followers. Can you describe these two groups and how Sphere navigates the challenges of communicating with both? It's a fascinating look at the psychology of change.
Oh, yeah. This is something that when we first started the company, we just knew we have two types of customers. They're the ones who just want to invest in a climate-friendly way. They found out that, hey, I can stop investing in fossil fuels and that can have a real impact on the planet, and they just want to do that. And they are the types who are champions within their organizations, trying to get climate-friendly options on their 401ks, or who are asking their financial advisors, hey, can I make this switch? So those are the key. That's the core. That's our community. That's who we created this company for. Those are the heart followers. And then there are the rule followers. And these are the people who have a fiduciary responsibility. They can literally be thrown in jail if they make decisions that are not in the financial best interest of plan participants on a 401k plan. So it's especially these 401k advisors who are the key influencers in deciding what fund options get added to a 401k plan menu. HR people will oftentimes be in this boat as well, a CFO of a company, anyone who's on this 401k committee that typically meets quarterly and checks on the performance of all the funds in the menu and decides whether to make any changes. Those are those fiduciaries who we kind of categorize as rule followers. They have to follow those rules. It's very important to them. And so when we communicate, something that was kind of an aha moment for us in our communications as a company and figuring out how do we communicate to the world when straddling these two very different target customers, is we realized our audience really is the heart followers. They're the ones who are leading the movement. We talk to them, and we just need to make sure that we are talking to them in a way that is acceptable to the rule followers too, right? So we're talking to them about how, yes, you can make a very positive impact on the planet doing this. And also we're equipping them with the financial data that they can communicate to their HR person saying, look, it makes financial sense to provide these options too.
What's the biggest hurdle you face today in getting Sphere on major 401k platforms? And what would a domino effect of large plans adopting your solution look like?
So we have faced major hurdles getting on 401k platforms. It has turned out to be very hard. And it wasn't a surprise. When I was even thinking about starting Sphere, I had a lot of people tell me, don't even bother trying to break into the 401k industry. It's so hard. We tried, we couldn't with our funds. Just don't even go there. I'm grateful that I had started a semiconductor company prior, and the semiconductor industry is famously hard to break into. So I was up for the challenge. But they didn't lie. They were right. It's very hard to figure out how to even get on big platforms like Fidelity and Schwab, Vanguard, Voya. There are these big 401k platforms that are used all across the country and that big companies use as their 401k providers. And they're unlikely to switch to some new startup to perform that service. They're probably going to be sticking at least in the next few years with these known quantities. And those companies don't necessarily share very openly what it takes to get on their platforms. But one thing that holds true across all of them is if they see demand, if they see requests for a specific fund, they will take that seriously. They specifically need to see those requests from 401k advisors. So you need to have 401k advisors going to platforms like Fidelity and Schwab and saying, we have a client that would like to use this fund. We expect this much in assets under management to get invested in this fund. Once you add it to your platform, please add it. And then the platforms, they each tally those requests and they keep a running tally until they hit their threshold. They all have different thresholds of how many millions they need to see in demand. And then they have other requirements. Some of them, it could be they won't even consider a fund until it has a certain amount of assets under management in the fund. It's essentially a big chicken and egg problem trying to break into the 401k industry because you have to get customer demand from customers who can't get your thing yet. And it feels really good to be at a place now where we have gotten on all the major 401k platforms. We finally arrived. We're 4 years in and we are on Fidelity, we're on Schwab, we're on Vanguard, we're on Voya, Empower. We're really on most of them at this point. And so now when those 401k advisors make the request to add us to a 401k plan, it just happens. It's not a struggle. It's not a relationship they have to build with their relationship manager over there. And so we've broken down that barrier, that wall, and now we're just growing. And that domino effect is one that I'm especially excited to see at the large plan, or really I call them mega plan side of the market. So we've started with small 401k plans as our fund has been small with not too many assets under management. And as we've been growing our assets under management, we've been able to target bigger and bigger plans. We're now able to target big plans. Like if it has a few $100 million or even $1 billion in assets under management, it's realistic for them to add us to their 401k plan. But we cannot yet target the mega plans that have 50 billion. This is where those social movements exist at Google, Microsoft, Apple. We're not big enough yet. We currently have, I think it's 57 million in assets under management. We need to be at 100 million in assets under management before we start really targeting those plans seriously. But once we do get on one of those mega plans that has 50 billion in assets under management, we have been told by those HR managers that they compete with each other because they're all working to recruit the same tech talent. And if one of those big tech companies starts offering climate-friendly options in their 401ks, the other ones will feel like they have to just to keep up and to be able to retain talent, especially because this is an issue that employees care so much about. And so I'm really excited to get on our first mega plan and then start to have those dominoes fall.
Get on one of their companies that they own.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I bought some SPFF today. So you can target Roth IRA because a lot of Roth IRAs are managed by people themselves. So they can buy it.
Exactly. Nice. That's great. Yeah, it's easier than ever for people to invest through their own accounts now because we just recently became available on the big brokerage platforms. Fidelity, Schwab, etc. If you have an IRA, a Roth IRA, or traditional IRA, or even just a brokerage account, you can search for the Sphere 500 Climate Fund and invest that way.
You also serve as an advisor for other climate-focused organizations like As You Sow and C Combinator. How do these roles give you a broader perspective on the climate finance landscape? And what are some of the most exciting new areas of climate investing you're seeing today?
Yeah, I love the advisory work that I do. It's really fun to be able to share some of my experiences I've had now with a decade of entrepreneurship and help newer entrepreneurs learn from those stories. And I advise a lot of entrepreneurs, even the ones where I'm not an official advisor, listed on my LinkedIn profile as well. As You Sow in particular has been a very important relationship. That is not a for-profit startup. It's a nonprofit that's been around for a long time, and they do shareholder advocacy. And I got to know them back when I was still at Ayar Labs, and I was just trying to understand this crazy world of 401ks and why it was so hard to get a climate-friendly option on the Ayar Labs 401k. And I met the CEO of As You Sow through those conversations. I was just trying to talk to anyone I could who knew anything about 401ks, and that's how I got introduced to him. And he invited me to join the advisory board for the nonprofit. And this was as they were building out their Invest Your Values platform, which is a great website that people can check out. They also run fossilfreefunds.org, which I highly recommend. It gives just amazing transparency it gets it to people's fingertips so they can understand what funds are actually invested in. And we ended up partnering very closely with As You Sow as we launched our first fund, the Sphere 500 Climate Fund. We use their data that they make publicly available for fossilfreefunds.org to inform what companies we should screen out of our index. So they define who counts as a fossil fuel company for us, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel in doing that research. And then they also launched another initiative called As You Vote. And so we work with them to vote our shares at the companies we do invest in. So our process is we start with the 500 biggest US companies by market cap. We filter out the fossil fuel companies. We have a few other screens also provided by As You Sow, so deforestation, tobacco, etc., private prisons, weapons. And we're left with 400 something. I think right now it's 405 or so companies in the remaining list. And for those companies, we vote our shares in favor of climate change related shareholder proposals. And a lot of people don't think about this, but when you're investing in a 401k or an IRA or brokerage account, the fund manager of that fund you invest in is voting on your behalf every time that there's a shareholder proposal or a board election at any of those companies the fund is invested in. And index funds tend to just always vote however management and boards recommend. And that means they're voting against 98% of shareholder proposals having to do with climate change. So even though over 80% of Americans are worried about climate change and want to do something about it, they are voting against climate progress of the biggest companies in the world without even realizing it because someone's doing it on their behalf. And so we're flipping that equation. And As You Sow is a very important partner for that.
I know, that's terrible. I mean, if people learn that, they'll be horrified.
Exactly. And so that's why we think it's so important to democratize access to climate-friendly investing, where there have been fantastic funds available that are actively managed and more expensive and not getting on 401k plans that more wealthy people invest in, or maybe some institutions, but just the regular investor through a 401k or IRA hasn't had access to those more expensive funds. Either because it's not getting on 401ks, or even in your personal life, you might think like, hey, I can't afford to pay such high fees. Like it really makes a difference. It could be like $100,000 less that I have in retirement because those fees accumulate over 10, 20, 30 years to be really significant. And so by being really the first low fee index fund that offers climate aligned voting, we're democratizing access to really voting in a way that aligns with people's values.
You have helped fossilfreefunds.org create transparency. Why is it so important for the average person to understand what's in their mutual funds? And what's the difference between a truly fossil-free fund and why is it so-called ESG funds?
Oh, yes. This is something that has driven me crazy ever since I was just CEO at Ayar Labs asking for climate-friendly investment options in our plan. First, it's just, I kept getting a lot of answers from our 401k advisors like, oh, interesting, let us look into that. But when they eventually did start coming to me with options to add to our plan that were climate-friendly, quote unquote, they were ESG options. And as a non-financial person, I didn't know what ESG meant. And I was like, okay, I don't know what ESG is, but let me figure out what's actually in this. And I luckily found fossilfreefunds.org and typed in the names of those funds and found that they were invested in Exxon and Chevron. And I was like, okay. And I looked up the definition of ESG and I thought, okay, it stands for environmental, social, and governance. I guess I could see why our 401k advisors would think that would mean it's climate friendly, but clearly it's not. And I was just so grateful to Fossil Free Funds for existing and for making it easy to uncover that. And I don't think that there's some evil person in a back room at these big asset management firms being like, ha ha ha, we're going to trick people into thinking they're investing in a climate friendly way, but they won't be. I mean, I think there is a lot of dissatisfaction and anger towards the big asset management companies for perceived greenwashing, but I do also think it just comes of the mindset of a lot of folks in the traditional finance industry of just not really understanding what regular people are looking for. They most often, when they say ESG and they're like, we'll have an ESG fund, the interpretation is, let's minimize the risks posed to companies in the fund by environmental, social, and governance factors. And they're not actually intending to make a fund that's minimizing the impact that companies have on the environment or social factors. So it's an inward-looking approach and not an outward-looking approach. So it doesn't even have an intent to create a fund that's good for the planet. That's not even what asset managers are trying to do a lot of the time. And so I think that's where a lot of confusion ends up happening in the marketplace, where regular people looking at this are like, wait, what's the point? Why are you calling this ESG if it's invested in Exxon? And so at Sphere, we purposely never use the term ESG. We never have. Even before the term fell out of favor, we already just were explicit about calling this a climate fund, because the goal of this fund is to invest in a way that's good for the planet and also good for your wallet.
Hollywood stars are pushing their pension plans to sell off fossil fuels assets. How does this kind of celebrity activism and digital protests, like the one you've been a part of, amplify the movement you're building?
I feel so grateful that this is an issue that so many stars, Hollywood celebrities care about, because what we're up against is the fossil fuel industry, which is scared that we're taking away their investment dollars. And so they've mounted a real campaign. They've probably poured billions of dollars into what's turned into this anti-ESG, like what they want to make seem like a social movement, but really it's fossil fuel lobbyists paying talking heads on Fox News or senators on the Senate floor to say things like, well, you got to choose between investing with your progressive values or investing for good returns. And they know that that's not true. They know that the data shows actually investing in a climate-friendly way has resulted in better returns more often than not. But they know that if they say that line often enough, people will start to believe it. And that is what has started to happen. So the billions of dollars of resources of these fossil fuel companies in marketing budgets has made a real impact that we've experienced in just talking to regular people over the past few years. More and more people have been coming to us saying, oh, I really want to invest in a way that's better for the planet, but I just don't know if I can afford to because I don't have that many savings and every dollar counts. You know, we have to correct those misconceptions. And so having actors who have millions of followers posting on their Instagram profiles, on their different social media profiles, the facts, that data about the fact that actually the fossil fuel sector has had the worst returns of any sector of the economy for the past 2 decades, like having Mark Ruffalo with his many millions of followers say that on his Instagram feed has so much more impact than I could ever have saying it myself. And so I'm just super grateful that this is an issue that over 500 actors have taken up and have posted about on their social media and have spoken to the press about, and they're really spreading the word. And so by giving kind of this free publicity to these facts, we're able to push back against the billions of marketing budget of big oil. And it's so important. And we're seeing success. We've had over 200 million views of the Actors Retire Big Oil campaign that Stand.Earth has been running. And I feel so lucky to have been able to speak on a panel with a few of the actors who participated in that campaign at New York Climate Week. And they are true heroes. Hearing them each share their stories of why they care so much about this issue and how pollution has impacted themselves personally and their communities personally, and how just the horrible human impact that the fossil fuel industry has had on people around the world, and how that drives them to this activism, was just really moving, and I think it's only going to grow from here. So I expect that SAG-AFTRA, the pension managers, will see the light and will move out of fossil fuels. It's just a matter of time, and it's about having conversations and those actors really engaging with the board members who make those decisions at SAG-AFTRA on the pension board. And just seeing that win, I think, will also encourage regular people who work at different companies that, hey, if the actors can do this at the SAG pension, then they can do it too in their own 401ks.
Ayar Labs and Sphere show that innovation is happening at every level, from the technology that powers our world to the financial system that fund it. It's an inspiring message. Okay, final question. And this is what we ask all our clean titans. And you're definitely a clean titan. What is your vision for the next decade of climate finance? When you look ahead, what gives you the most hope that we can truly align our financial systems with a livable, sustainable future?
My vision is that everybody by default invests in a way that's good for planet and people and good for their wallets as well. And what gives me hope is honestly looking backwards at history and realizing the system as we have it now of how 401ks work and how we're all pushed towards these index funds that vote against climate progress, that hasn't always been the system. And it's actually pretty recent. It's only been the past few decades when index funds have really taken off. All these 401k lawsuits only started existing 2 decades ago. And prior to that, actively managed funds were the norm, and fund managers who thought critically about shareholder voting and board elections were the norm. And so we don't have to be stuck with this system in which index funds keep us in the status quo and make it so hard to move towards a clean future. We can change that, and we're doing it by providing an index fund, and we'll be launching more index funds that move us out of that status quo and move us towards a better status quo. And if the world could have changed so quickly over just a couple decades in such a major way in the past, that means we can do it again. And we as people, as individuals, have a huge amount of power to move the $45 trillion that's in retirement savings in this country alone to really accelerate the climate transition.
Yeah, and these people, when they're evaluating, they don't even take into account the trillions and trillions of dollars of coastal property that's going to be distressed, that's going to become unbankable and uninsurable, and the values will plummet.
It's true. Yeah, there's a lot of risk in our financial system as it's set up right now. And so we need to change that status quo, both to protect ourselves financially and to protect our lives and to protect nature and this beautiful earth that we live on.
Well, that's a perfect note to end on. Alex, thank you so much for sharing your profound insights with our audience. Your work is truly inspirational.
Thank you so much for having me.
For our viewers, you can learn more about Alex's work and how to green your 401k at oursphere.org. If you want more interviews that empower you to become part of the change, Be sure to hit the subscribe button. I'm Ali, and you've been watching Clean Titans. See you next time. And Alex, I'm sorry I missed you at NYC Climate Week. I wish we had connected there. It would have been great. And I would invite you to become advisor for that REIT of REIT companies that is sustainable that I talked to you about.
Oh, yeah, I would love to learn more. I'm fascinated by that. Like I said, it's not my expertise at all, but I love learning.
Great. You can be an advisor for all the other stuff that you've gone through, right? All right.
Yeah, I mean, share more. I'd love to learn more.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
The insights and solutions we discuss here are crucial for a cleaner future. They're about a fundamental shift in mindset. We believe that interviews like this are so profound, they can change the course of your life. If this conversation moved you, hit that subscribe button to join the community that's building the sustainable future. Thank you for watching. Like and tell your friends about Clean Titans and consider supporting us on Buy Me a Coffee. And we'll see you next time on Clean Titans.